Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Pavan, and I'm an engineering manager on the enterprise team at WorkOS. Now, before I tell you what I'm going to talk about, I'd like to start with a question. What's that one feature every single B2B SaaS application must build and rebuild at least 3 times as it scales? It's authorization, the feature that quietly powers every single button click, every API call, and every enterprise deal. And the bigger your customers get, the harder it becomes to get it right. Now, what is authorization? Generally, a lot of people confuse it with authentication. Authentication says who you are, whereas authorization determines what you can do. For example, I'm sure you all use different SaaS applications where you're attempting to take an action only to be blocked by lack of access, and you had to escalate that to your IT admin or manager who clicked a few buttons to give you a role or permission. Well, that is authorization. Now, why do enterprises care about authorization? Access control defines trust. Enterprises won't buy or deploy software if you cannot guarantee that the right people have right access at the right time. Security and compliance. Pick any acronym, SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, Zero Trust Initiatives. Authorization is at the core of all these standards. Complex organizational structures. So when you start, your customers are probably small, like they have simple organizational structures, but as your product matures, you start attracting larger customers who bring in things like departments, subdivisions, lines of business, subsidiaries, and generally a lot of their access management hierarchy maps one-to-one with their organization hierarchy. And enterprises really care about representing this hierarchy in any SaaS application they use. Operational efficiency. Poorly designed authorization system means your customers' IT admins, application admins, and end users are doing a lot of manual work to cover the gaps. Integration with identity systems. It's not enough that you build the most flexible or scalable authorization systems and the controls and configuration only live within your product or application. Enterprises really expect you to expose all these controls and configurations to be compatible with the identity systems like Microsoft Entra, Okta, or Google Workspace, because that's where enterprises live. Now, you might say that all these problems apply to every single enterprise feature. But what makes authorization unique is that it's central to your entire product. It doesn't live in this adjacent layer like most of the other enterprise features. Now, all of this might sound a bit too abstract, so I'd like to run you all through a case study of a popular SaaS application and see how every stage of their product growth maps to all these problems. So I'll be talking a bit about Figma today, which, as you all might know, is a popular design collaborative platform which enables teams to create, prototype, and share user interfaces in real time. Also, just a disclaimer, Figma is used as a representative example of a modern B2B SaaS platform. Every detail doesn't perfectly map to Figma, but it's useful as a reference to understand how authorization problems evolve at scale. All right. So on day one, the day Figma launches their product, well, when many SaaS companies start, eventually, even if they're selling to enterprises, they start by selling to users first, because they want to achieve product market first with users before they figure out how to do it with organizations. So what are some things that they truly care about at this stage? Things like frictionless sign-up, great onboarding, and instant product value. Beyond this stage, you probably might see some early glimpses of authorization if your product has a multi-user collaboration feature. For example, in this case, Figma has this notion of file, and you need to, and this is a shared resource that multiple users can edit. So they build a pretty primitive authorization system where if you're an owner, then you can add, edit, or delete a file, or add or delete a collaborator, and the collaborator has a subset of these permissions. So you can get pretty far with just these features, and authorization is still not a problem here. But once you start selling to enterprises, at this stage, probably you have a bunch of designers at early stage companies, And the way they've signed up to Figma is either using their personal or work email, and they're using probably their own credit cards and expensing it out of band with their companies. Well, companies start, as adoption grows, companies start noticing that the organization-specific resources are being created outside their purview, so they'd like to centralize it. So companies start talking to Figma here. Now, this stage is also where you would see early glimpses of enterprise, because Figma would need to go build this concept of organization and attach all these free-floating users and resources under that organization. So outside of this, there are a few other feature requests that you get from customers around authorization. They ask for 2 new user types that are not your product, that are not going to be your core product users. One is the admin, who is the one who sets up this organization, verifies the domain, adds and manages the users, or does all the administrative things, basically. And then the second user type is a billing admin, who adds or updates payment methods, downloads invoices, and does all the compliance-related things. So what does Figma have to do here? They have to go back to their system, which was that primitive permission-based system. They have to list down all the things that you can do within the platform, and then express them as this atomic set of responsibility. Here's all the things that an admin can do, and here's all the permissions that billing admin can do. And then abstract them into this higher layer entity called roles, so that their customers can assign this to their employees. This also helps Figma, because as they're rapidly growing from here, they'll continue to add more billing-related features or admin features, and they can just assign this to these roles, and every single customer who has that would automatically get it. Now, into year 3, there's even more adoption of Figma. Even larger companies are starting to use it. Well, until this stage, the way you would collaborate in Figma is you open a Figma file, click the share button, add name, or add the email, and you're done with that, right? So because you directly know the user, you actually know who they are. But at these larger companies, there are actually multiple design teams collaborating with multiple engineering teams on different projects. So the collaboration boundary starts evolving from just a user to a group of users. So this makes sense. I mean, the Figma starts seeing this complaint from multiple customers, so they go and prioritize this concept of user groups, so that their customers can bring in their organization or collaboration hierarchy into Figma. Now, why does this affect authorization? Well, until this stage, the authorization system only had to worry about granting and revoking permissions to a user. But now they have to worry about this higher layer entity, which brings its own set of technical complexities. For example, when a user is added or removed from a group, the system has to ensure it grants and revokes privileges correctly. You end up in merge conflict problems. What if a user was explicitly granted a role, as well as they got a role because they belong to a group? Now, when one of this is not true, what do you do with that role? So you have to deal with these kind of complex problems. So Figma hasn't still rewritten their authorization system here, but you can see how the complexity is growing. All right. So in the next stage, into year 4, even bigger companies have started using Figma. So at this stage, if you guys remember a few slides ago, Figma introduced this concept of billing admin. So the way they did that was talking to customers and understanding, oh, here's all the set of permissions that maps to this atomic responsibility. So I will express that as billing admin. Well, this starts breaking down once you start selling to bigger companies, because at these companies, there are actually multiple teams owning sub-responsibilities of billing. There's one team that just owns adding and updating payment methods, and there's a separate compliance team that deals with all the compliance-related things. Now, Figma starts seeing this pattern across more similar-sized companies who have different permutations of responsibilities. So something they fundamentally realize is that it's impossible for them to predict every single permutation of permission and express that as a static role. So what they end up doing is just list all the permissions they have and let their customers handpick these permissions and express them as custom roles. So with this, they do solve the customization problem, but they open up new can of worms, which is their customers have created so many custom roles that it's become hard to maintain and scale those roles. So Figma has to go back to the drawing board and figure out how do other companies do this. So they end up introducing this concept of role inheritance, where Now their customers can define these custom roles, and every time Figma introduces a new feature or a permission, they just need to add it to the leaf node roles, and it automatically bubbles up to all the other custom roles the customer has created. Again, you can see that your authorization system evolves to become even more complex. All right. Around this stage, like into your year 6, you start seeing bigger customers who want to automate everything from identity provider. Now, why do these big companies want to automate everything from IDP? So until this stage, everything we have talked about, all the concepts we introduced, all of this has to be managed through Figma's admin dashboard. So imagine this big company had this one admin who managed everything, and they either left the company or their credentials were compromised. This company has essentially locked themselves out of Figma. So the only way to get back the control is to reach out to Figma support and ask them to manually fix it for them. This is exactly the situation big companies don't want to be in. And that is the whole reason they want to automate everything from the IDP, because that's where they live and they have full control over it. As you all might know, you can automate this authentication through SSO protocol, and you can automate user provisioning and deprovisioning through SCIM or directory sync. But what about access management? A lot of enterprises want to automate this, but what does the integration look like? So let's take a look at what are all the ways you can do that today. Unfortunately, there is no good standard or consensus across the industry on how to do this well. You can do that. You can automate access management either through SSO, or you can do it using directory sync, which is slightly better. But end of the day, it depends on what your customer prefers. The way you can represent this information over these protocols could be either through groups, if that is how your customers group access permissions within their IDP, or they could prefer sending it through user attributes if they have some kind of complex policies within their IDP that normalizes all this as an attribute on the user. So it's like a 2x2 matrix. You can pick one of the protocol, or you could pick one of groups or attributes. Now, Figma has two hard choices here. One, they could pick one of this combination. Let's say they could say SCIM with attribute. The problem with this is that every single customer who falls in the other bucket has to learn to, they have to work around to make it work Figma's way. So that's already adding a ton of friction. Along with that, the customer is not familiar on how to do this well. So you're basically waiting for a security incident to happen. The second option they have is to invest all the engineering resources, like multiple years or more than that, to support all these variations. And the thing that makes this really complex is that you can't just do this with one IDP. There is no standard thing that will just work for all IDPs. Even though they are protocols, you all know that it's just a spec. End of the day, different systems implement it differently. So all the IDPs have implemented SSO and SCIM slightly differently. So you have to, Figma has to invest in understanding what those variations are and support all these 4 2x2 matrix across all these IDPs. We at WorkOS see this problem all the time for all our customers. And we've already abstracted the problems away from SSO and SCIM, and we have built a bunch of things to make this as seamless as possible for automating access management as well. All right. Now, I don't think we have still rewritten the AuthZ system. OK, this is that slide. While Figma's customers continue to grow, something else is brewing on the side, where their core product users are asking for better abstractions for things like workspaces or projects, because it's getting infeasible to manage hundreds and thousands of files in a single view. So this feature request kind of makes sense. So Figma introduces, prioritizes this work. And on the second point, Figma is also opportunistically trying to look for more opportunities to push new product SKUs. For example, this is the time where they release FigJam, the brainstorming tool. Now, why do these things affect authorization? Well, every single time you introduce a new concept or an entity within your application, every product team has to really worry about how does it deal with access management, and how do their customers interact from an authorization point of view. And this fundamentally breaks your entire AuthZ stack, because until this stage, your entire permission graph was two-dimensional. What do I mean by that? When I logged into Figma, I was an admin, and I was an admin from every single resource point of view. Like any action I did or any resource I touched, I was still an admin, right? So it was kind of like a two-dimensional graph. But now with introduction of workspaces and projects, when I log in, I'm still an admin from organization point of view. But if I click into a workspace, now I'm a workspace collaborator. If I click into a project within that workspace, I'm just a project member. And there's another project that I created where I'm a project owner. So you kind of flip the entire permission graph problem from a 2-dimension to like 3 dimensions. So it exponentially grows. So it's a really hard problem, and everything that Figma has built so far with ReBAC won't scale for this. So you pretty much have to re-architect everything by introducing like new design patterns. There are a bunch of solutions out there to help with this problem, and there are too many acronyms in AuthZ. Things like resource scoped ReBAC, relationship-based access control called ReBAC. You have FGA, fine-grained authorization. But end of the day, the problem with all these solutions is that you have to invest a ton of time because it has a steep learning curve. These systems are so generic that you have to invest a ton of time like mapping your application requirements into these systems. And there are a bunch of other problems, like you have to sync all your information, you have to create this graph, they have like unintuitive mental models. And as you can see, we are still in year 6. Figma is still trying to grow rapidly. They have a ton of product features to build. You don't really have the time to invest on a company-wide migration effort, which could, as you all know how company-wide migrations go, it takes like more than a year, right? So anyways, they had to take this action because clearly they had to grow their product. So Figma ends up prioritizing these resources. They rewrite their entire AuthZ stack to unblock this specific use case. Now, I think we talked a bit about IDP automation a few slides ago. But now, once you introduce new, deeper nested resources like workspace and project, you'll start seeing customer requests who want to not only automate your organization-wide roles, but they also want to reach into your nested resources and automate that. For example, there might be a super confidential project, and the IT admin wants to ensure there's like this one specific person who's the admin, and there's like secret group of people who have to be the members of that project. So they really want to control that through IDP. How do you do this? Like, how should these IDP systems know that Figma has this kind of access hierarchy? There is no good solution out there. So they have to pretty much build this entire mapping layer, mapping UI to make sure the IDP groups or resources can be mapped to your deeper, ad hoc, ever-changing application model. All right. So now, even larger customers start adopting Figma. They've become pretty popular, and they're starting to see interest from customers in new industry segments, for example, like finance and healthcare. And these customer segments bring in their own unique set of authorization requirements. Your authorization stack starts to become even more context sensitive. It's not about who you are anymore. It's when, where, and under what conditions you're performing that action that starts becoming more relevant. Let me give you a few examples. This finance company who's your customer could say, hey, block all the exports in the application during a financial close week. So it's like a time-bound access policy that the customer wants. Or a healthcare customer could say, these patient records are only accessible by this user if they're on-site or if the requests are coming from these allow listed IP filters. It's like a location-based or attribute-based policies. Now, your authorization stack has to evolve like into this nuanced policies. To support this, first of all, you have to go back to the drawing board, understand what are all the attributes across your user, all the resources in your application, resources or in your application, and then expose all of them for your customers so that they can use that information to create complex policies. And once you support policies, the next complexity that your customers ask for is, hey, I want to manually override certain cases. For example, I've written this complex policy which will cover 90% of the use case, but 10% of the time where you'd be denying, instead of like outright denying them, can you notify the admin so that they can manually verify and approve or deny that request? So you have to build a workflow engine. So end of the day, Figma has to prioritize this ABAC model and build a policy engine on top of it, and then build a workflow engine on top of it. So your entire authorization system has started evolving from a static access check to a dynamic decision-making system. So once you build this, you realize that you made pretty much everything extremely slow. As I mentioned initially, your authorization checks are part of every single API call, which means any slowness in this workflow will be immediately perceivable by your end user. So you end up going back to the drawing board and again re-architecting that entire thing so that it's scalable. All right. So finally, Figma's made it. They've reached the big leagues, and they're starting to get interest from Fortune 50 companies. So let's take Microsoft as an example in this case, where Microsoft is interested in Figma. They start talking to them. But what they realize at this point is that GitHub and LinkedIn, which are both subsidiaries of Microsoft, are already using Figma. And they are a separate organization. They brought in their own IDPs before they acquired them. And things are working fine. But for Microsoft to sign this deal, they not only want to automate things for their company, but they also want to bring in these subsidiaries into one IDP system. Now, this request throws a big wrench into everything Figma has built so far, because they made a fundamental assumption that this organization is a clean concept that maps perfectly to your customer. It's a beautiful walled garden, and every privilege gracefully trickles through every resource. But now, where do you fit in Microsoft here? Should it be at the same level as GitHub and LinkedIn? Then that seems a bit weird that one org can access other orgs. That seems like a security foot gun. Or do you represent Microsoft as an organization and push GitHub and LinkedIn as a new sub-org concept? Or do you make Microsoft a higher layer entity like Enterprise and keep GitHub and LinkedIn as is? So either of these options requires you going and reaching out to every single product and feature. At this time, you probably have multiple teams owning different products. Every single feature has to understand what this new entity Microsoft means and make sure they make their feature work with that concept as well. And this is not just an authorization problem. Like the enterprise grid is it ends up affecting your SSO, SCIM. Pretty much any enterprise feature would be affected by this requirement. And GitHub and Slack, they have spent like multiple years solving this problem. All right. So just to summarize, through all these product stage growth, what we saw was that every single feature in authorization is fundamentally changed how your product or technical architecture works. So it's unlike other enterprise features which sit on your adjacent layer, so you can rapidly evolve that, but you can also rapidly evolve your own product and technical infrastructure. But authorization is not that straightforward. So one small bad decision ends up compounding over time and slowing down your enterprise adoption. Yeah, like AuthZ is at the core of your entire application. Now, yeah, this is an actual quote from one of the engineers at Figma when they had to pretty much rewrite their entire technical infrastructure so that it could scale with their product evolution. Few key takeaways from this case study. We saw that how each single user, every persona, every customer segment ended up changing your authorization and indirectly changing your product evolution. We saw that off-the-shelf models like ReBAC, ABAC, policies, FGA, ReBAC, all of these things just solve the slice of a problem, but they don't solve your entire life cycle. And we saw that automating access management from IDP systems like enterprise scale solution, it's a complete mess. There is no unified consensus out there. You can go and read on it. Every single application does a different combination of SSO or groups and attributes. There's no right way to do it. Now, a meta takeaway on this, as we saw, we went from like day one to Fortune 50 company that I think the timeline was around like 8 to 10 years. I'm pretty sure it was really hard for like Figma's engineering team to like evolve their authorization system to keep up in pace with their product growth. but they still had some time. But in the current ecosystem, this entire window is getting squished into 1 or 2 years. You have these like rapid scale companies which are reaching that Fortune 50 stage within less than 1 to 2 years. So this entire problem that we just talked about becomes 3 to 4x harder because you have to make all those rapid decisions in much shorter time. Just when we thought we had humans figured out, now we have AI agents. This entire space is evolving a lot, but there are 2 interesting patterns that are bubbling up that I wanted to highlight. One, agent access for automation. Many SaaS applications are starting to see these requests to allow agents, bots, and scripts to log in on behalf of a user and perform a bunch of actions, like ClickOps. Now, this is a new problem for applications because it's a new type of actor who has to behave like a user but operates at the speed of machine. So it's a really interesting problem from authorization point of view. Now, there are a few guardrails that every application has to consider. One, you should not allow your agent to inherit the entire permission graph of the user. You have to grant your agent a scoped, just-in-time privileges, just enough so that it can just perform that one small task, following the principle of least privilege. A second guardrail that you have to pay attention to is to make sure your AI agent that's logging in shouldn't be able to escalate its own role to an admin, or change other users' roles or permissions, or mint new tokens, or change credentials. Like, you have to really bake these guardrails into your core authorization system. And a second interesting pattern that's evolving is if your SaaS application supports an AI native feature. If you have a generic input text box where your customers can interact in natural language with their own resources, then this is something you have to start worrying about. You probably have some kind of local RAG system built which indexes all your customers' documents. Now, remember I told at the start where enterprises will immediately shut off this feature, or worse, they might churn away from your product if this feature ends up responding to a question by accessing a resource the user did not have access to. So your authorization is at the core of this feature. Now, fundamentally, you're trying to marry like a deterministic authorization system with a probabilistic LLM model. So you can't just ask your agent to, here's my permission graph, understand and make sure don't respond with anything that the user doesn't have access to. It'll definitely go ahead and do that. So you have to really enforce all these guardrails yourself. If not, it's a pretty big risk for enterprise adoption. So how do you do this? Imagine the AI agent already has access to 1,000 documents. And if your customer asks a question, that question's intent probably just needs 100 documents. So you fetch those document IDs, and then you apply your authorization layer here. Even before you send this query to the LLM, you filter out all the documents the user doesn't have access to, and then you send only the documents they have access to within your LLM context window. Now, there are more interesting problems that are still evolving, like your LLM has memory, so what happens if the user loses access to one of the documents? Like nobody knows what a good solution is yet, but you have to kind of keep yourself updated on how the industry is evolving. Now, how's WorkOS thinking about this problem? Like, we've talked to a ton of customers, and all of them bring up the same friction point, that all the solutions out there either solve slice of a problem, or they require steep learning curve and this heavy like multi-month or quarter-long migration projects to start adopting it. There is no solution out there that gradually evolves and scales along with your application's needs. Because there is no single application out there who can perfectly predict what their authorization requirements are like 5 years from now or at every stage. So they really need a solution that can, at every stage, gracefully evolves with them. Now, for past 7+ years, we've been working on enterprise problems. We have integrated with tens of thousands of customers, and we've seen all the fragmentation more than any one single application can ever see. And for past 2+ years, we've been working on AuthKit, our user management product, which has helped us understand what rapid scaling early stage companies need. So kind of combining the learnings from both these segments, We understand that authorization is yet another big problem that is really blocking applications from becoming enterprise ready. So we've thought a lot about it. The team has worked really hard on it, and we have a ton of solutions to help companies continue to work on things that make their product differentiate from others. So the ask that a lot of our customers have, and something that we are thinking about, is to club all these authorization jargons, acronyms, and abstract away as much complexity as possible into a simple unified interface so that we can gracefully evolve with you. If you could relate with any of the things I talked about or have thoughts on it, I'd be curious to hear from you. Thank you.